I call to order the Highland Park Board of Education hybrid special voting meeting preliminary budget presentation today, Monday, March 17th, 2025. The New Jersey Open Public Meetings Act was enacted to ensure the right of the public to have advance notice of and to attend the meetings of the public bodies at which any business affecting their interest is discussed or acted upon. In compliance with the Open Public Meetings Act, the Highland Park Board of Education has caused notice of this meeting, setting forth the time, date, and location to be submitted for publication to the Home News Tribune and Courier News, and posted on the board's website at least 48 hours in advance of this meeting. Members of the public who wish to address the board will be given the opportunity to do so before the board adjourns for the evening. May I have a roll call, please?
Dr. Beatty,
Here.
Ms. Cassel Dunn,
Here.
Dr. Coleman, Dr. Pixley,
Here.
Ms. Bruce. Here. Dr. Schoolman, Ms. Stanio,
Here.
Ms. Vardman,
Here.
Ms. Voorhees.
Here. We'll stand for the pledge.
I pledge behind the pole. We'll give 1 second. Sorry. Thanks, Mr. Rosa.
Thank you.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
There's no communications to report at this meeting, and there's also no approval of minutes. Our student representatives do not have a report either, so we're going to go straight to our superintendent's report.
Jump right to it. Good evening, everyone. Tonight, I would first like to invite Ms. O'Sullivan to come up to the podium. We're very excited. Ms. O'Sullivan is our head girls basketball coach. And for those who also don't know Ms. O'Sullivan, she is a school counselor at the high school. And she is going to share a little bit to honor a very well-deserving basketball player. Ms. O'Sullivan.
Right. Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Dana O'Sullivan, and I'm the girls varsity basketball coach at Highland Park High School. I'm here today to honor Vanessa Kohler, who is one of our senior athletes who has made a profound impact on our girls basketball program. I first met Vanessa when she was going into 7th grade, and I was just beginning my time at Highland Park. It's hard to believe that as we stand here today, Vanessa is just a short time away from completing high school and beginning a new chapter at Ramapo College, where she will major in criminal psychology and play for their women's basketball team. Vanessa ended her Highland Park basketball career with 1,670 points, which makes her Highland Park High School girls basketball all-time leading scorer. The record was previously set by Nikki Inzano 36 years ago in 1989. In addition, Vanessa ends her time with playing 104 games, earning 835 career rebounds, 195 career assists, 51 career blocks, and 370 career steals. Vanessa was named to the GMC First Team All Blue Division multiple times, and this year received GMC All Conference honors. Vanessa was also nominated for Sports Illustrated National Girl Athlete of the Week and was a Jersey Sports Zone Game Ball winner. Vanessa's accomplishments are one for the record books, but what I am most proud of her for is her relentless work ethic and will to win. No matter what opponent that we were up against and no matter what the scoreboard said, Vanessa gave it her 100% effort and never backed down to anyone. Vanessa was constantly hustling on the court and trying to get any deflection, steal, loose ball, or rebound that she could. She never stopped working. The resilience that Vanessa has displayed throughout high school is something that is truly admirable and a testament to her toughness and the unwavering support from her parents, grandparents, and siblings who were there for her in the stands each and every game. Vanessa, I am truly so grateful to have been a part of your basketball journey, and I know that there are bright things ahead for you at Ramapo. Thank you for all of the time and effort that you put in to help our team be the best that we can be. As you take this next step in your basketball journey at Ramapo, never forget the lessons learned on and off the court. To honor Vanessa's achievements, we placed an order for a plaque to display in the athletics hallway. And thanks to the HP boosters, we will be ordering a 1,000-point scorer banner to celebrate all of the 1,000-point scorers in the Highland Park basketball history. So congratulations, Vanessa. Yeah, very well deserved. Sure. And I got this. That's cool. You get what their families do? Thanks, Doc. I think you guys earned it though. I'll take the picture and I'll send it to Sullivan and she can share it. Thank you.
Congratulations again, Vanessa. Lots of honors well deserved, and thank you for your relentless pursuit of excellence, both on and off the court. And we wish you nothing but great success in your future. So congratulations again. And I cordially invite you to stay for the rest of the presentation tonight, but I always give the option. Feel free to, excuse yourself, no worries. And especially Mr. Brzezowski and Ms. O'Sullivan, who put in a long day of work. Thank you. One day someone will take me up on my offer. I just know it. One day, one day. All right, so I'd like to shift the rest of my presentation to the preliminary budget, which is the framework and dedication of tonight's board meeting. So tonight, Denise DeRosa, our school business administrator, and myself will present our preliminary budget. So I put copies for all the board members just because some of the font gets a little fine there, a little small, so that you can follow along. So I give a lot of the same presentation year to year, just to remind everyone, since we do these meetings really twice a year when we talk about budget. But our budget process aligns with several things. First, we do our best to align our budget with district goals and objectives. That's something that's very important to us. We do align our budget on the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, the Every Student Succeeds Act, and the New Jersey Student Learning Standards. So we take into account all of those different buckets when we are planning for the budget. So in addition, our process really spans quite a long time. In fact, when we were passing the budget last year, Denise and I got right to work thinking what we were going to do for this coming year's budget. So it's really an ongoing process, but the reality is it starts for the entire team really in the fall. So what we do is we have a budget build process. And what Denise and I do is we go to our team, the administrators, and say, build a budget. For our building level administrators, they get a per pupil spending allotment. And then they decide how they want to divvy up that allotment. And then for the rest of the team, they build it based on the needs of the district. Each of the administrators meets with myself and Denise. That happened between December and January. So they meet with us and we go through their budget, looking at line items. We ask for justification, especially if it's a new expense, a large scale expense to justify it. We also look for quotes, invoices, things like that to basically prove that what they want to spend is how much it costs. So it's not just we estimate something's going to be a certain amount of money. We want to make sure we get our budget aligned as close as possible. So that process happens. And then in February, the members of the department administrators met with the Finance and Facilities Committee to review their budgets as well. And then tonight is the overview of our budget. Well, then on March 11th, the Finance and Facilities Committee met to have an overview of the budget. Tonight, we will have our discussion, pass the preliminary budget. Then what happens is in just about a month or so, a little over a month, we'll meet again at our end of April board meeting to have the final budget passed. So what we have to present tonight and what we have to put in to the county is a balanced budget. So that's what we have to propose. And that was a very difficult task this year. But I'm really proud of the work that we did to get there. And then we'll pass the final budget at the end of April. So in terms of our planning process, our budget takes 3 levels from a philosophical perspective. The first item that we hit when we're budgeting is any of our legal requirements. So for example, special education is an area that people are very familiar with. That is a legal requirement. Requirements for students that are ESL, things like that. If it's something that is requirement of the New Jersey Student Learning Standards, for example, world language, physical education, a certain amount of teaching time for mathematics in elementary level or reading, things like that. Those are all legal requirements or DOE requirements that we have to meet. So those are all our first level budgeting items that we take into consideration. Then from there, we go to a level 2. So if there's still room in the budget after level 1, we go to level 2, which are required by board policy. So for example, a couple of years ago, we changed our graduation requirements. So they're still in line with the DOE, but we adjusted them. So that would be, for example, by adjusting, it may require, for example, more staffing or more variety of things or whatever it is, more variety of courses. So that would be a level 2 requirement. So if it's board policy, that becomes a level 2 requirement in our budget. If there is money after that left over, then we hit a level 3 requirement, which are not required, but high priority and a high investment for the community. So those are things, for example, our music programs. So music at the K-5 level is a requirement, but it's general music. So things like band and orchestra would be above the requirement, but that's a high investment for our community. Mental health and social and emotional learning programming are required standards in physical education and health, but we go above that by requiring, by having mental health professionals on staff and our teen center and our UBHC to support our students and things like that. So those are examples that when there's money left over after the first 2 buckets of requirements, we can then hit some of the areas that are what we think are valuable for our students. So in terms of our fiscal responsibility, so a couple of things to note this year, like I said, this year was quite a challenging budget. For us, one of the things that's important to note is in September, we had to exhaust all of the COVID relief money. So any of the extra money that we got from our BESSER, the COVID relief, had to all be expended by September, which means we didn't have that cushion in our budget. Through the past couple of years with that COVID relief money, we were able to shift some things out of our operating budget to that set of funds, which was really helpful in offsetting a balanced budget, but we are now exhausted all those funds. So things that we may have put into the COVID relief money, we took back into the operating budget. We have continued increased costs for students with disabilities. You'll see in our presentation, for example, our out-of-district students, actually, in same thing like last year, the number of students going out of districts has declined, but their tuition rates are increasing. The amount to transport students to those places are increasing. And then locally as well, we increased our budget to include an additional social worker, things like that. So that has increased. Our facility maintenance projects, as you can see throughout at least the past year to 2 years, when we neglect facilities and problems happen, they get very expensive to maintain. So you'll see that we, have approved to fix the structural issues going on at Bartle, but that comes at an expense. So we have that fiscal responsibility. There are a lot of federal and state mandates that are required. So those level 1 and 2 took up a huge chunk of our budget. So the harder decisions that we had to make this year, and that Denise and I really had to present to the board, were you have to make some decisions on those level 3 requirements. What's really important? In addition, the Highland Park Administrative Association contract expires June 30th of 2025. So we have contractual obligations. Last year, we had the HPEA contract that was ratified with great success. And now we're working on the ratification of the admin contract. So we have to build that into the budget. We're constantly, in terms of a fiscal responsibility, looking for ways to save money. Interestingly enough, when our snapshot went out in October, our enrollment was down. So we constantly are looking at student enrollment, but also their needs. So a lot of the information that was sent to the board in terms of where we had to cut in our budget and what that would look like came from data-driven decision-making. So we pulled every grade level, every student count, every special ed count, literally every nook and cranny, and everything was made based on, are we getting the most bang for our buck with the money that we're spending? And then, of course, the analysis of factors like the effect of state aid that we take into account. So speaking of state aid, this year was a little bit funky in how they calculated our state aid. I'm going to toss the mic over to Mr. Rosa to explain the changes in the calculation to state aid.
Right, so as Dr. Suska mentioned, the state did reformulate the state aid formula, and they changed the way that they calculate what they give to each district. So it was important for us to take a minute, analyze the state aid calculation so that we can determine what factors really went into effect and what we can do, what's in our control to mitigate anything in the future. So the changes in the calculation this year, the state actually provided funding for the actual number of at-risk and special education students. So that was different this year. So you'll see in the table below that our special ed categorical aid has increased almost $725,000 because they're actually providing funding for the actual number of students. The state also used an average of the last 3 years for district income and property values, which is different than years past. This average took it into account years 22, 23, and 24, I believe. But what they did was they also weighted those areas more than in the past. So what they're doing is shifting the responsibility of school funding to the taxpayers and the community. The state also capped the amount of state aid that could be increased or decreased. So one of the issues that many districts across the state of New Jersey talk to the state about is it's really hard to budget when you don't know what's going to happen to your state aid. It's like a mystery formula. So the state heard that and they issued this cap and said no district could have their state aid increased more than 6% and no district could have their state aid decreased more than 3%. So looking at the table, you'll see that our state aid calculation, had there been no cap, the state was going to reduce our state aid almost $1.1 million. And because the state looked at district income and property values and weighted them more heavily, our local fair share is actually higher than our tax levy, which means that the district is below adequacy. Thankfully, the state did issue an adjustment to the cap, and we only lost $184,000. But most recently, the state did release information on Friday about something called the Tax Levy Aid Incentive Program. This will be an application on New Jersey Homeroom that districts can apply for. And it could be if districts want to increase their tax levy above the 2%, taking all enrollment adjustments, health benefit adjustments, any adjustments that we can, they will share the cost based on this application. So it's something that the board should really consider because it's a way that we could stabilize our budget and hopefully deter any future cuts or future formulas of state aid that will be a negative impact to the district.
Thank you. So I know last year when we were having these conversations, one of the things that we got truly lucky on that I think I communicated last year was that we were able to balance a budget with very little publicly facing cuts. I believe if you recall, I think we had to riff an ESL position and we cut the middle school 6th grade Mandarin program. So we got really lucky last year. A lot of what we did through attrition. So as people were leaving the district, we just didn't replace them and we were able to stabilize it. Nothing was impacted from an instructional perspective. I made sure of that and we, are a well-oiled machine. I'm hoping that we can get through that same thing this year, although I'm not really sure what the future holds. There's a new turnover at the governor's office for an election in November. So what the state will produce in terms of school budgets, thinking about that $1 million cut in mind, we really have to be sensitive to how we're spending the money. So I'm hoping that what we can do between now and the final budget is to mitigate the impact through attrition as well. Although there might be a couple of areas that unfortunately we're going to have to cut. But hopefully the budget will enable us to maintain that schools will be fully staffed with qualified personnel. So that is something that I can guarantee through this round, that there won't be any issues with having fully qualified, full staff in the buildings. We will be able to maintain our instructional resources, updating our standards to ELA, math, our multi-language learners, areas like that. So we'll be able to maintain our instructional resources. I will say that in terms of maintaining our instructional programming, there will be some adjustments due to enrollment and changing student needs. So like I said, we looked at it, we had a decrease in enrollment. So we really have to look across that to make sure that, the reality is when we actually looked at it, we found that there were some classes with very little students in there. And so through some adjustments, we were able to shift things around and start to close sections. So we just need to be really mindful of that. So it's, it's not really best practice to have a special ed class of 2 students, and, we're doing a lot more with our inclusive education model, and it's really working. The PD that's happening, the co-teaching models, that real focus on closing our achievement gap with special ed has really helped. And we're taking a deep dive in those numbers. So we're looking at everything very carefully to make sure that our instructional programming is adjusted to meet the needs of our students, but that we're being fiscally sound in doing that. So nothing is at the expense of instruction, but rather to enhance instruction. Something that was really important to the budget was maintaining our interventionists, the ones that were meeting data-driven needs. So again, when I asked the staff, I said, please bring me all of your data to see where we're having the most bang for our buck. We looked at it, and for the majority of our interventionists, the data was very profound and very impactful. Like, we're meeting a lot of students' needs. Some of them we're getting them in, getting them out. Others are in there. We have more that need to be in. There's basically a waiting list in some areas. In other areas, the data wasn't there. So in that case, we might not need that position, an additional position anymore. So we're really looking at those details very, very carefully. That data, we're maintaining them, but where the needs are. And I'm very pleased to share that we will continue providing courtesy transportation for students on hazardous routes. The budget will enable the district to include facility improvements. So we will be able to fix the structural repairs that need to happen at Bartle, and the area formerly known as the walkway. We will not be replacing, I'm calling it the walkway, but it won't be a walkway when we're done with it. We're going to close that area up and ensure it to make sure that the area of the boiler room and the business office are secure structurally. But unfortunately, we aren't able to replace the whole walkway. So we'll have other ways to get in and out of the building. We will be able to fund 60% of the preschool classrooms. So starting for the 26-27 school year, we will be able to open up 1 additional preschool class. So next year, we're maintaining the students that we have, the number of students. The following year, we'll open up an additional class because they have to do the renovations. So they're taking the cafeteria, chopping it back in half to its original of half being the cafeteria and half being a preschool classroom. And we were able to do that because of the 40% that the state has funded us. And we will be able to include some additional increased security cameras at the middle and high school. Additionally, we put a small allotment of money in to fund support supervision for in-district after-hours public-facing events. So during safety committee meetings, it's been brought up over time to talk about, we've been doing great things to increase security during the school day, but at our events after school, hasn't been, we haven't had much attention paid to that. Unfortunately, we're not able to support funding like in a company to come in to provide those services for us. So we'll work with the HPEA to negotiate a compensation. We'll build a job description, so that will be coming soon to the board. And then we can post that and have basically crowd control for our in-district staff to support events, so that any public-facing events like a high school musical or something like that, that there's somebody there for crowd control and help with those events. So there was a small allotment of money in the budget for that. So now we'll get into the most favorite part of the whole presentation are the finances. So first, Mr. Rosa, would you like to talk about the revenue?
Sure. So for the 25-26 school year, we're proposing a 2.88% general tax levy increase. This includes a 2% increase plus a roughly $280,000 in a healthcare cost adjustment. What the state does is analyze the cost of health benefits last year versus what's budgeted for this year. We're anticipating a 14% increase in our healthcare insurance costs. So we were qualified for an adjustment, which the board is taking. You'll see the decline of state aid of 184,000. We're projecting extraordinary aid of $1 million. This is just an estimate. Our 24-25 extraordinary aid figures will not be known until July 2025. Our other local sources and interest is a decrease. We're projecting 450,000. It includes interest income, tuition of students that attend our schools, pilot money from the township, enterprise activities, and refunds for prior year expenses. We're projecting a decrease because we have one less student that's going to be coming to our district. She now resides in Highland Park. Federal aid is semi, so that's what the state tells us to budget. There has been a change in how they pay out semi or Medicaid reimbursements. So our projected revenue for semi has decreased significantly. We're also going to be utilizing capital reserve over $2.2 million. The majority of that, $2 million, is for that structural repair at Bartle. And the other portion is the Irving alteration for the pre-K classroom. We're going to be using $80,000 of maintenance reserve to support our maintenance of our district and $10,000 of our emergency reserve to support those additional cameras at the high school and middle school. We're also going to be integrating the door cameras at the high school and middle school to the Milestone platform, which will enable the administration to view who's at the door from their computer instead of it's just one computer now. And then we're projecting surplus of roughly $1.4 million. So our total revenue for 25-26 is $43,789,946. Moving on to expenses, you'll see that we're projecting regular programs of instruction of $9.4 million. Total special ed instruction, roughly $4 million. Bilingual is increasing. We're projecting $386. That is directly related to our enrollment. We have a significant increase in ELL students. Our co-curricular athletics after school and summer programs is $806,000. Our total supplemental at-risk instruction is $430,000. Our out-of-district tuition cost is $3.7 million. That's a decrease because it's due to enrollment. Our attendance, health-related, other support services. This also includes those extraordinary aid costs, one-to-one nurses for those specific students is increasing 5% to $3.8 million. Other student support services, the special education department, $1.2 million roughly. Improvement of instruction, staff training, media services, roughly $800,000. School district, central, and IT administrative cost, roughly $3.3 million. Our operation of our plant, $3.4 million. Student transportation services is decreasing a little bit because of that out-of-district tuition. We were able to collapse one route. Employee benefits is increasing 8.27%. Like I mentioned before, we're projecting our renewal for health, medical, and prescription to be 14%. Our capital outlay is increasing tremendously because of that Bartle structural repair and the Irving classroom of 2.3 million. We pay for students in the community to attend charter schools. That is increasing. We have projected, I believe, 23 students going to charter schools. It's roughly $400,000. And we also utilize some interest for capital maintenance reserve for a total budget of $43,789,946. So what does this mean for the average taxpayer? So the average assessed home value in Highland Park is $481,500. With the general tax levy at 32 million roughly, and the debt service tax levy, which is to pay our bonds back, our long-term debt, and the estimated net taxable valuation, the average home will have an annual school tax of $7,773.87. It's increasing $260.51 for the year.
And that concludes our presentation. I know that there are probably going to be questions or potentially comments, so we will open up the floor for board members.
Who would like to go first? Sarah, go ahead.
Just to make sure I'm recapping this, because I think the work that was put in here is pretty incredible. I can kind of see, can you all hear me? Just to recap, so it sounds like we would have owed a bit more, but because of this kind of state resolution, we weren't, right? What in that instance, if that didn't happen, and I guess that's not reliable, right? So the idea is we need to acknowledge that something like this could happen where we have a deficit. And now while we're not having to bear that this time, where we would have had to make much trickier cutoffs or trade-offs, we're not having to do that, but we do need to think about kind of sustainability moving forward. Is that the
Correct. And we were talking about this idea of if the board would like to pursue an increase to the tax levy to fund more additional things, some things to consider, might be more of those facility projects or areas that are sustainable in the long run versus personnel items. Because next year, it's like, okay, we're potentially saving something next year, but the prediction is it's probably going to be far worse. You saw what it could have been. So just to kind of backtrack, I really appreciate the way that Mr. Rosa starts the budget process. So essentially what we do is when we sit around, the first thing I ask the administrative team is, what new positions would you like? In a perfect world, what would you like? Extra school counselors, extra mental health staff, extra this, I want this, I want, smaller class sizes in math, right? So we go through all of it's not outlandish, by the way, they're reasonable requests. And then what we do is, for example, I know I presented on the program evaluation from the school counselor for the school counselor program, and they had suggested another counselor, at least at Bartle or Bartle Middle, to share. So we build those into the budget. And then we looked and we're like, okay, well, we have about $4 million to cut to get a balanced budget. So we started our budget process in a $4 million deficit because we predicted a significant drop in state aid. So then from there, I said, okay, no new positions. We're going to take those off because, the hope was if, we've had that 2 years ago, we did get an increase in state aid. So we were able to fund, that's how we got the assistant principal position at Bartle, things like that. We were able to fund newer positions because we had an increase in state aid. That was not the case this year. So any new positions were out off the chopping block. And then from there, we chipped away. And every nook and cranny, we searched high and low. We went back to and evaluated everybody's budget. Where can we save? Unfortunately, sometimes what we do too is we look at the title funding and say, okay, can I put this PD in the title funds? Can we absorb the cost of the interventionist in the title funding? Unfortunately, there's going to be a bigger hit to our title funds. Potentially, they're predicting up a 25% reduction in our title funding, and potentially the Title IIA, which funds PD, could be abolished altogether. And we don't know those things. So that's why it's anything that is sustainable, we really have to put in the operating budget. So again, we pretty much put a value and itemized every single ticket item that we could find on the back end to close that gap places. And that's what we did to get to a point where we had the balanced budget. So like I said, hopefully between now and April, when we really look at those items, you know, they can be a little bit more forward facing and public facing, but that's essentially what we did to look at if we have a decline in enrollment, where is that decline and how do we collapse sections, or how do we and do those things through attrition so that we don't have to go out and say, well, we have to have now all these rifts and all these cuts. I think we're able to mitigate it a little bit this year. You know, and you're right, Ms. Pixley, you know, next year, I'm not so much. I don't predict it.
Just something I'd like to clarify on that point as well. When we're talking about next year, is that we don't know who the governor is going to be. Governor Murphy really has prioritized public education funding, and you know, there's more public education money coming from the state than there ever has been in state history. You know, 65%, 66% of districts saw an increase in their state aid. You know, 30% of those districts, ours included, saw a decrease. And I think, just to reiterate the point, we were looking at a $1.1 million cut. We don't know if the 3% cap on how much we can lose is going to be statutory, whether that's going to be a law that's passed, or whether that's just something that happened this year, and then with a new governor could not be in existence next year, right? Similarly, you know, they just changed the way that they weighted town wealth, right? They said they're going to weight it more heavily this year than they did previously. Like, so we have no way of knowing what it's going to look like next year. And that $1.1 million cut that's in here could be coming next year very, very easily. And so that was actually a question I had. Can you just kind of give, obviously we didn't have to do it because we've been able to primarily protect academics in this preliminary budget, but I'm assuming that if we had a, you know, 20% cut or 17% cut in our state aid, we'd be looking at cuts that would impact student academics and personnel. Is that?
Yeah, that's correct. And some of the areas, so here's how detail oriented we were. So for just some examples, so the PEA grant that's going to be passed, the money that we get for preschool, has line items like for administrative oversight, budget, finance oversight, supervision oversight, things like that, secretarial support. So we literally were like, okay, if we charge some of the supervisor salary to that takes the load off the operational budget. If we, you know, Esterosa oversees the budget for that grant. So by charging a little bit, a small portion of her salary, we're able to take the weight off of the I mean, that's how very detailed we got with trying to get that budget balance while still maintaining. The board was presented with some confidential information to say, here are your options when we look at cuts, because these are not easy decisions, but really, again, any of those level 3 things that we value are potential options that could be on the chopping block next year. I value and I love our math interventionists, and we are doing some great things by closing the achievement gap, but it's something that the DOE says we don't have to have, but we value it. That could have been something that made the chopping block. Areas like our Bartle Band and Orchestra, or, you know, just band and orchestra really, are areas that are above and beyond the New Jersey Department of Education's requirements. We're maintaining them, but that could be an option. So we really have to dig deep to figure out how that's what they're saying. The DOE is saying, listen, you're a wealthy enough town that your taxpayers can support what we can't, which got us into the high property tax to begin with many, many years ago. And the whole point of the S2 formula was really to try to balance that out, to take the burden off the taxpayers. And so that wealthier towns, it was equalized, right? So non-wealthier towns and wealthier towns could educate everybody, equally, so that if you didn't have more money, you could do more. So, but just seems like they just can't get that right. It's very complicated. But like I said, this year there'll be obviously there were some hard decisions that had to be made, but they were all data driven. So in theory, actually rather easy to make because the data spoke for itself for our cuts. But next year, so those are just, again, there are more sort of items on that list, but everything has been itemized for the board at a cost to figure out, what we're looking at. And the same thing, when we found out that it was a 3% reduction, we went back to the drawing board and said, okay, we can save a couple of things now. So of those things, we took stuff off that chopping block. So that's why I think this year it won't be as bad as it actually could have been. There might have been some people that would have, staff and community members that probably would have been upset by some original ideas that we had, knowing that we were going to lose an additional $1 million. But some positions were saved this year, well, really for next year, that might not be in the future.
And then along those lines, in that we don't know who the governor is going to be next year and, how they're going to prioritize funding the school formula. There's also instability and questionability about federal funding that we're getting. And I just wanted to clarify some of the areas of federal funding that we have. And, please add on to it if I'm missing anything, but the special education aid that we get from the state is federal funding,
Correct.
correct?
Mhm.
And then free and reduced lunch is federal.
Correct. And they've
funding.
already stated they're not going to fund local food sourcing out
Yeah.
of that. So right now we get funding to purchase from the local farms, fruits and vegetables. And the state actually pays for those produce items. So that would go down to the cafeteria budget, which is outside of the local budget, but it's still federal funding.
And then there's the title funding, which we don't know what's going to happen to it. So
Correct. And included in this budget, the local budget did take on an additional chunk of the interventionist, but there is still a large portion that's charged to the ESSA grants, which are the title grants, Title I and Title I SIA. We did take into the local budget the Bartle interventionist because Bartle is no longer a targeted school. They don't qualify for Title I SIA.
which is good news, except for the loss of funding.
Correct.
And so celebrate their success.
Yes.
Can I ask about the enrollment? I thought the last numbers we saw, the enrollment was slightly up, but it was not. Is it across the board, all the schools?
So
or-
here's what they do in great DOE fashion. Every October, they take a snapshot of all the student, like a lot of student information in every district. So October 15th is this glorious snapshot where they take a moment in time, and then essentially they use that to calculate everything. So in October, our enrollment was down. 2 weeks later, our enrollment went right back up. So our budget, so the calculation of state aid was based on that October 15th snapshot, which our enrollment was down. So even though our enrollment is up,
That's
we're
weird.
not getting that money. So it's a moving target. So what we've said to anybody who will listen is, especially anybody who has connections down in Trenton, that maybe they could do, listen, a snapshot is a lot of work. We, have people on staff that literally just go through our data and make sure everything is sound for that snapshot. Even if they did like a January mid-year check, is this accurate? Is it not? But the DOE doesn't do that. It's October 15th is a snapshot. And as we know, we actually do have a high transient population of students. They're going in and out. Their needs transfer, all the time. So it's unfortunate that any given day, our enrollment is either up or down. Yeah. And this year, interestingly enough, if you remember, we had to close a kindergarten class and open a first grade class because typically our kindergarten classes are higher. And this year, oddly enough, our kindergarten enrollment was down, but first grade was up. So in October, we made the switch to move one of the kindergarten teachers to first grade to have the additional class there. So things, sometimes our enrollment is just a moving target.
I just wanted to ask a couple questions. I think it might just be helpful to hear some of this. So I think one of the things that is really important is the state calculation of our local fair share, right? So they're saying, I think in this coming school year, so correct me if I'm getting this wrong. In this coming school year, our tax levy should be bringing in $34.2 million. And even if we were to increase our tax levy as we're proposing for the budget right now, we would still be at 32.5 million, right? So they're saying our tax levy is way lower than what it should be compared to other districts in the state of similar income and that kind of a thing. So even with this increase, we're still below what they would say, right? But this puts us in a place where we can fund kind of the fundamental programs, assuming there's not big kind of federal cuts and whatnot, right? Is that fair interpretation?
So yes, the state says that we, our amount under adequacy is roughly $1.3 million. Because they look at adequacy spending versus the adequacy thresholds. So that's what they just released Friday morning.
Okay.
So they said that we're underfunded 1.3 million.
Okay.
And the way they calculate adequacy is they look at enrollment, special education enrollment, at-risk enrollment, right? Like that's kind
All of
the-
those
yeah.
factors, all of that student data as of October 15th, that's what they utilize to calculate adequacy funding. And then they look at what the local fair share should be compared to that. And then they do this calculation.
Yeah. And then I think there's another piece to this that I'm really hazy on, which is if we do this increase more than we, then it makes us eligible for some state support. Is that
Correct. So the state just released on Friday, it's called State Tax Levy Incentive Aid. There's 300 districts in New Jersey that are qualified for this aid, and I believe there is $20 million in that pot. So what that application looks like, what we would actually be eligible for, I don't know. I can't answer that at this time, but they said that districts could receive up to 5%, the lesser of 5% or up to $1 million in that incentive aid. I'm not sure what if they're gonna look at your reserves to see if you have many reserves. We're depleting the majority of our reserves, doing that Bartle walkway. I didn't do a lot of facility projects this year. John and I talked that we're just focusing on the structural repair because with the tariffs that are set to take place, steel could get it at a whole-time high and it could cost me or us $3 million versus $2 million, and then I won't have any money to pay for the repair. So we were being conservative. But there are tremendous amount of facility projects that are maintenance that's needed throughout the district. And more pop up every day.
I was going to say that was when we talked about when we met with the departments to say, hey, we have to cut to close that $4 million gap. Facility projects were on there. No Irving heat pump or no Bartle bleachers. There was a lot of things that were like, we're just going to have to maintain. We had tried to budget for math resources to support elementary math with Envisions. Unfortunately, that's quite expensive and that hit the chopping block. We couldn't fund that. So, I mean, there were a lot of big decisions that we had to make, but, again, but potentially some things that if we want to bring back through that increase in the tax levy, we could consider as well.
right? But we're not eligible for that additional funds if we don't increase our tax levy.
Correct.
And
That's what they get you.
that's all proposed right now. So because the school budget is on a different schedule than the state budget. So this is a proposed idea. And what they proposed was $20 million, a $20 million putt. That could be more. We don't know, but we know that we'd be missing out.
They said that they could give us up to 5%. Is there a minimum? Are they saying they'll definitely give us something? No.
No, so we have to fill out the application first. So we have the 2.8%, 2.88% that we're proposing for the 2% that we get, plus the addition for the health benefit increase. And then potentially looking at going up for the difference, but there's no guarantee. The other thing, again, to that point, is that we won't know until like June, July. So we have to make the decisions to produce a balanced budget at the end of April. Then if this is a possibility and we all decide that it's a possibility, we move forward with it, then we can kind of add back some things that were priority items, if that's something that you want to do. And all that information you have on the, on the back end, we've been itemizing all of that and, giving as much data and information, costs. Facility projects might be a moving target now because of the cost of goods, but we're trying to even get estimates on every little thing so that we have an idea of how much these things will cost, but we won't know until early summer.
Yeah, I think the important thing too to highlight is with the instability with the federal piece too, and just make sure, I mean, this is like a weekly update and tracking with this. And I think that's part of this is to be very diligent in that. And when we get more information about what we might have access to, we're going to have to be very forward looking. I think there's a lot of risk, I think, with the federal dollars.
Absolutely.
I mean,
Agreed.
it's the special education money.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
the special education aid we get is
Yeah.
federal funding.
Mhm. And I budgeted 25% below what we received this year in anticipation for a cut, and that money is used for out of district tuition, especially ed. Excuse me. But the state has already indicated to Ms. Kessel that there probably is not going to be an allocation, or we'll have to apply for grant funding with no allocation. That means we won't know what the federal funding amount will be. The state is preparing every district for that. So we have to develop a budget or a use for these title funds, not knowing how much we have to spend. So it's just uncertain times.
What's the amount that we get from in title funding now roughly?
It depends on the grant. The Title I SIA is 50,000 we got for Bartle. Roughly the same for the middle school. Title I, I just can't remember off the top of my head. It's a couple $100,000 that supports interventionists mainly. So we kind of realigned how we look at federal funds. We look at it from a district level down. So we utilize them for interventionists, and then we do programming. So in that programming could be brothers mentoring. It could be a variety of different things. The climate and cultural specialist is charged there.
Our family liaisons.
Correct.
Yeah, we have a lot of really great things that we do that comes out of that funding, that if the funding goes away, that's a level 3 priority. And, have to decide what is of most, this is like really critical. I can't emphasize this enough, that it is the most critical time to really decide what is of the highest value. The highest value. We just don't have the luxury to have everything. I know we want, smaller class sizes in certain areas. I know that we love, there's, things that we love about our schools, but it's really, really important to scrutinize every dollar and really look at some of the options. And, at the end of the day, the decisions that are made, something has got to give. And we're at that breaking point. We got away with it. A lot of fruitful years with the COVID relief money. Honestly, we were sitting pretty good, but I feel like right now we're just sitting on some hard times, and we just have to make decisions, but know that it's all data driven, and to try to impact instruction as little as possible. I mean, even co-curriculars, scrutinizing that, you know, the district, the operating budget picks up a certain amount of money for out of state and out of country costs. For students to go away out of the country, we have to have a separate insurance policy for that. That costs the district $5,000 per trip. So if students want to go to Quebec, that costs at minimum $5,000 just for the insurance policy. Never mind the rest of the money that the operating budget picks up for chaperones and travel and things like that. You know, that is upwards up to $80,000 for potentially those trips. So it's like, again, I love those experiences for students, but what are we balancing when we have a significant achievement gap? When we have students that have some, you know, some extraordinary needs, we really have to weigh out what is critical for our students in our community. Very, very hard decisions. I know myself, I'll speak for myself, and I know Mr. Rosa, because we've been every day. It's been tearing us up, and we've had a lot of sleepless nights over this. It hasn't been easy, and I predict more future sleepless nights ahead. You know, I just can't emphasize that enough.
I do really want to thank you for all of the work that you've done. I mean, I know how carefully you guys have looked at this, and when you look at, you know, I'm so grateful for Denise and Christina and how you guys are managing this, because, you know, this could have, if we weren't on top of things, this year's budget could have been a disaster. You know, with the aid cut we did see, and the end of the COVID money and all of that. And that's something that you do see in other districts, neighboring districts, even with the cap on the amount of aid that districts could lose. It's a really rough budget year, and we know we're in for more next year. So I just want to say thank you for, you know, prioritizing academics and, you know, the work that you've done.
I'll.
Go ahead. Monique has a question, and
Oh,
then I'll come
of
back. to
course.
you.
Oh, hi. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm sorry I can't be there in person this evening. I guess I just wanted to underscore, as I know we all have talked about this, but I want to underscore the importance of the fact that the state finally does have special education funding formula that actually takes into account our individual student needs in our district, as opposed to looking at sort of a statewide average model. And I know, again, federal funding stream, we know is in great jeopardy and peril, but at least we now will have aid levels where they should be, which I think is important to at least have and know what our actual need is and what's needed to reach our students. We have a real budget in terms of, funding our special education services, which, I think is definitely something we should, just really underscore the how monumental this actually is, given how long we've been operating under an unfair funding system. And then I just wanted to say, I think one of the last comments you made, Dr. Susko, which I totally understand, just the how challenging it is to think about the kind of funding cuts we're going to be experiencing. It's very sobering. I do just want to be careful and caution us not to sort of frame this when administration, when the board is thinking about difficult budget decisions. We want to be careful not to frame it as looking at, we have achievement gaps, and then yet we also want to make sure that we're able to provide students with the kind of extra co-curricular activities that we know benefits all students. I think, again, I know your intention with that sort of statement, but I do think it's important that we are very careful in how we frame and talk about and make decisions around our funding, our budget, so that it's not about that no one ever thinks that it's about kind of our students that have, as you said, are being impacted negatively by achievement gaps, quote unquote, or opportunity gaps are the reason why, right? We can't sort of fund the kind of, programming and special activities that we know will enhance every student's opportunities in the school district. So I just kind of wanted to put that out there because again, that's something I think we just want to be careful about.
Ethan?
Yeah, I want to obviously echo points everyone's made about the really hard work you guys have done. I also want to say, in the year since I've been on the board, I mean, I've watched a lot of decisions being made with the strategic goals in mind. I feel like the district's spending its money wisely, and the spending is lined up with the priorities that the board sets. I can't think of a single instance when I feel like I heard something in committee and I thought, where is this coming from? It all really makes sense. One thing that I'm struck with, especially this conversation, is that, it's still a really tight budget, and we are proposing, or this proposed budget would raise the tax levy higher than it normally would be able to, and even with that, it's very tight. And I think we've seen past year with the facilities. I mean, $2 million for, we cross our fingers, hope there's not another Bartle walkway around the corner, but I mean, we're exhausting our reserves. And with that, we spend that down, we earn less interest. And that's really important stuff. It's hard to predict what's coming around the pike, not just from the federal government, but from our physical plant, and things that policies we might think are going to be really impactful, but we might not have the extra money needed to implement them correctly, when those could save us money in the long run, right? If they benefit achievement, if they help students out, if they say then anyway. So I wonder, is 2.88, if we raised a little bit more, would that compound and make sense? Even if we don't necessarily have to, but if we can build back some of those reserves and have a little bit of a cushion, I personally think that would make sense, something I would support. And I think, the successes we've had over the past year make me think that the community would support it as well. We may hear from people about that, but I wonder if that's something that could be considered.
Thanks, Ethan.
I did just want to clarify something about the special education state aid, because it is great that instead of, calculated from a statewide average, we're actually, they calculated it based on, how many students are actually in special education. However, it is not clear that that is how special education funding is going to be funded next year. And also, again, in all this discussion about state aid, that does require, this state aid expenditure to be adopted by the legislature in the budget on June 30th. So, they changed things around this year, and that's, it's great. However, that is as of right now, that is no way how they're going to be funding special education in the future.
So write a letter, write a letter to your representatives and say, thank you for finally funding us fairly. Yes, okay, yeah.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. And I do agree kind of with Allison's line of thinking here, that this is the time for advocacy, strong advocacy to really shore up kind of legislative support to maintain what we can here at the state level. But I also just wanted to say, to Ethan's point, I was, really thinking along the same lines as Ethan in terms of worrying about sort of the facilities needs and the real how that could really set us back tremendously, just any major facilities breakdown or whatever repair need. So I mean, I hear you, Ethan, and I feel like that same sort of thought ran across my mind. Like, should we be thinking about slightly more than 2.88 if we're really thinking about giving ourselves a little wiggle room in terms of we have old buildings, old infrastructure, and what the need will be there. So I just wanted to kind of, kind of support your point here on that.
Thanks, Monique.
Yeah, I mean, hey, for what it's worth, yeah.
Let's write that one down.
All right.
That was
so-
also, that was my concern as well. It's like,
yeah.
if you're using up all those reserves, how are we going to get any of that back? And that when you spend everything, that's when the big things happen.
Mm.
So, I mean,
Yeah, everybody knock on your table.
It's Murphy's Law, yeah.
Yeah. So I did leave about 900,000 in capital reserve just in case the walkway came, or the formerly known as walkway came in higher, because I just can't predict the future, and I didn't feel comfortable adding on more projects, not knowing the final cost.
We thank you for that.
I mean, in addition, as we're continuing to talk about, instability at the federal level, like the costs of these repairs are going to be going up. So
Yes,
just on the material side.
yes. So out of this year's budget, we're doing a set of bleachers at Bartle, and we got a letter from the vendor that be prepared for a 60% increase. We're like, we already issued the purchase order. We're not paying the increase, but good try.
That's what that's what we're dealing. That Bartle area is steel, and steel's going up a lot.
Yep. All right, so I think, thank you again for all of your hard work on this budget. And thank you to everyone for all of your insightful questions. And we can bring this conversation about the tax levy back to committees. And once Denise has more information, we can start to kind of have those conversations, see what that might look like. So for now, we're going to move to public comment. The Highland Park Board of Education welcomes public participation and has reserved this time for your comments. Board policy number 0167 establishes and regulates the right of the public to participate in public meetings. Is there anybody online, or how many people do we have? 3? 2? Oh. Does anyone? It's one of them, Monique. Oh, okay. Is anybody online for public comment? You can raise your hand. Okay, and with no hands raised, we're going to close public comment, and we're going to move on to board action items. Are we doing committee reports next week, I guess? So committee reports will be next week. Fine. So finance and facilities, I'm going to have you introduce your action items. You're the only one.
There are many of them. As we've been discussing all evening, we have the authorization to adopt the tentative budget for the 25-26 school year. The numbers on here are what were on the PowerPoint that we all saw, so I'm not going to repeat them, and they've been advertised as required by law. So that's our first action item. Along with that, we'll just read in here. The Highland Park, let's see. I'm just going to read it as it is, and there's a read in on number 2, so I'm just going to read the whole thing. Be it resolved that the Highland Park Board of Education includes in the final budget the adjustment for increased costs of health benefits in the amount of $280,270. Now the change on this, that second sentence, the additional funds will be used to pay for the additional increases in health benefit payments. So what that says is that we were able to raise above the 2%. Because of our 14% projected increase in health benefits. I'll just add that was an area that we were very fortunate that Denise and the board followed up on those insurance changes. The state health benefits are going up higher than 14%. So we saved $1 million last year, I think, roughly, and now we're saving on the increase. It's still a very big increase, but not what the state health benefits would have been. So that's also an area that we thank you for your conservative budgeting and for that change. So that's number 2. Number 3 is this capital reserves withdrawal. The capital reserves budget line 620. It's a withdrawal from capital reserves in the amount of $2,281,080. This is for the let's see, let me just read it. If I try to summarize, it's not going to work. The total cost of this project represents expenditures for construction or projects that are in addition to the student learning standards. And in this case, oh, I see now. In this case, that $2,281,000 is for the Bartle structural repairs and the Irving, or 60% of the Irving pre-K classroom. So that's number 3. Number 4 is an addition $80,000 coming out of our maintenance reserve account. As reported by our comprehensive maintenance plan. Number 5 is a $10,000 a $10,000 withdrawal from our emergency reserves to cover the security camera upgrades and improvements that we need. Number 6, is approval of travel and related expense reimbursements for 25-26. That we approve travel and related expense for our staff up to, and actually board members, up to $175,000 for the 25-26 school year. Number 7 is our preschool program plan budget. Okay, our plan for preschool budget. And number 8 is the acceptance of the execution and delivery of the grant agreement, and that is for the additional classroom at Irving. So our local share of that is $262,000, and we were awarded $174,720 to complete that project.
Okay.
And that's finance facilities.
All right, so I think public comment first, right? And then.
Yeah, I think this is a
That's
mistake.
good. Yeah,
Since
it
it's there, I think we would open it up again.
Yeah, but you can open up if you want. Yeah. whatever you want.
Because
Okay.
it's there.
It's there. Okay.
Open it up.
So if anybody would like to public comment on the facilities items, the Highland Park welcomes your public comment. So if anybody online would like to comment, please raise your hand.
Anyone in the audience?
Yeah. And with no hands raised, we're going to close public comment. All right. Would you like to move your items?
Yes, I move items 1 through 8.
Second.
Question.
Oh.
I
Okay.
just realized I have a question. I'm sorry. When we put as a tentative budget, it can be changed.
We're not, yeah, so this is the
This
preliminary.
is preliminary.
Preliminary.
It's a preliminary budget showing the DOE that we've preliminary came up with a balanced budget.
I see.
And then we have about a month
Okay.
to
Mhm.
finagle it if there's any adjustmants that we want to make. And then in
That's what I
April, we'll
thought. I was
present,
just making sure.
yeah, we'll present the final budget.
All right, Dr. Beatty,
Yes.
Ms. Cassel Dunn,
Yes.
Dr. Coleman,
Yes.
Dr. Pixley,
Yes.
Ms. Prus,
Yes.
Dr. Schoolman,
Yes.
Ms. Stanio,
Yes.
Ms. Bardman,
Yes.
Ms. Voorhees.
Yes.
Okay. We have nothing for personnel. We have nothing for policies and regulations. Any old business? Any new business? Okay, I move we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Hi.
Happy St. Patty's Day, everyone.
Yeah.